When I first started learning how to code, I didn't realize how hard software engineering was. And I made decent progress with code, so I figured they were the same thing. You don't necessarily want to be a software engineer. The job kinda sucks. Mostly because every person who interacts with code thinks that code is what software engineers do. These people often get themselves into places where they've written code and it becomes more complex than they can navigate. Or their business has developed a dependency on software that they can't update. Then they hire one person or several to fix the problem. The business people don't actually care about the code, they just want it to work. Software engineers might care about the code, but they can't communicate why they care about the code distinctly from the fact that they spent years in the field. The response from business people is often something along the lines of, yeah, you're the expert in the thing that you spent all that time in, but ultimately, I'm the expert in understanding what we're trying to do. The software engineer might try to clarify that the quality of the code influences how quickly you can update it. Also, who can update the code? But the reasons the code is like that are often just because that's what happened. And it can be difficult for business people to relate to how few people want to learn how to code. Most people don't. Anyway, good morning. About a year ago, I began marketing the Kickstarter for Lore.land, which didn't ultimately get funded. That Kickstarter was set up mostly to fund a few creatives who I admire and want to work with. Because that Kickstarter didn't get funded, I didn't pay the creatives and I didn't ask them for work. In that year, I've been learning more about AI. When I post that I've been using AI, people accuse me of replacing people. They often disparage the stuff that's produced and say they wish it were produced by a human. These people could have contributed to the Kickstarter a year ago. Now, AI is a lot more efficient. So if the environmental concerns that were present a year ago haven't been recalculated based on how efficient AI has become, and if the critics of AI didn't fund the Kickstarter, I feel pretty comfortable moving forward with those critiques as invalid, with respect to my investment into creativity. I teach HTML and CSS. You can hand code HTML and CSS. If you don't like that I use AI, do what I'm doing. The world needs more support towards literacy. Cheers. Software engineering only exists where business people stop wanting to understand their code. Unless you can relate software to hardware, there's going to be some element of magic that isn't necessarily going to be intuitive. It isn't going to be obvious why something is difficult or complex if there isn't a clear path between the software and the hardware. For a lot of businesses, this is good because it enables them to describe what they're trying to do and get results that would be otherwise very difficult to code from scratch. The challenge is that it's really easy to create software that gives you magical expectations. Understanding computer science can give you a relationship to which elements of your code mathematically are going to be difficult to work with. Electrical and computer engineering describe how circuits work. If you can make a circuit, you can move an electron from one part of the world to another, or universe. Being able to create circuits is more consistent than writing software. I teach software engineering from the perspective of an electrical engineer. As a producer, this is what I'm working with. Software engineering and electrical engineering can be very abstract because our devices are so complex. The kinds of things that we tend to want to do are really easy because they've been replaced with language. Like, I can mention an iPhone app, and that communicates roughly the structure that I'm getting at. You can compare that to this painting. You might be able to see what it took to create this painting, and you might be able to see that the acrylic paint covers some of the layers. This part of the painting came from this tube of paint, not specifically this one, but you can see how the process of creating this structure is different than just painting. This is clay. It's clay, washi tape, and wood sticks. The modeling clay doesn't air dry, but this clay did. I use art to ground the connection between software engineering and electrical engineering. The reason I do this is because if I don't, people think the things I say are just lists of words. Understanding these concepts could be the difference between losing thousands per month or making millions per year. And that's why I set my rates to be what they are. Cheers! If more people were more creative, it would be easier to imagine preventative care. Currently, we are experiencing the result of generations of not caring about preventative care. We can't quickly reverse this mentality. We can invest in people who understand it and do what we can to support their goals. That's why I've been so focused on developing literacy skills. Web literacy is probably the most visible because that's what I talk about specifically on my TikTok. I've also been working with dozens of other artists towards a few different projects. Some of those get released when there's enough funding to release them meaningfully. I don't know if it comes across like I'm begging for money, but I wouldn't be able to increment these projects if I don't direct funding towards them. One way that I can be supportive is by using my websites and servers to host content that people develop with. So this is holistic media. The idea that sometimes you want to read, sometimes you want to watch something, sometimes you just want to listen to someone. There are ways to connect this to in-person experiences, but that really depends on what is available, when, and how much money it would cost. I've had a few conversations with people who have a lot of money, but I would need to coordinate the creatives to fund the projects that these people are willing to. When I've had conversations with creatives, they've asked for the money up front. Very often, the expectation of quality increases when someone is paid in advance. When that expectation of quality isn't met, sometimes that can create tension between the people who are aware that that expectation was there. I've been fired before, and it isn't a positive experience, so I try to structure my projects to avoid that feeling, to avoid creating that feeling in the people who work together. A lot of these projects are $100 away from gaining form, and when I can fund multiple projects at once, I can release them at once. If you grew up with Nickelodeon or Disney Channel, you remember how cool it was to look forward to something that was coming, like a season where there were shows that were coming out. It is possible to produce these shows, and there are topics that many people are trying to navigate today. I've already done the research and I already know who I want to hire, and now I'm looking for funding. Send me a message if you want to learn more, and I'll probably go live today later as well. Thank you for being mindful. Thank you for caring. Cheers. There's a show on Netflix called Adolescence. I haven't seen it yet. I'm kind of curious to see how it compares to 13 Reasons Why, which I also haven't seen or read. I'm a producer and I'm working on a few projects related to coming of age, just generally human development. That's the space that I'm exploring. My initial thoughts are that families can spend an hour per night painting as they're going through adolescence. If they do, the kinds of things that come up and the patterns of development become a lot clearer a lot sooner. We've already seen the aftermath of parents being caught off guard by some very toxic beliefs and behavioral patterns that their kids have. From the outside perspective, we can wonder why there was this disconnect. Like, how did you not know that your kid had this very toxic, harmful belief? A lot of the things that I do because I don't need to think about the development of a child right now. The amount that I post online can be seen by someone who has a kid. Technically, they don't know how much of what I do is easy for me and how much of it would distract from raising someone else. So it is possible that a parent can adopt my patterns of engaging with our shared media against the best interest of their children. Technically, it isn't my responsibility to care about their kids. Technically, it's no one's responsibility to care about the life that's been brought into the world. When these responsibilities are diffused, no one attends to them. If you've seen Adolescence, I'm curious to know what you think. Are there things that I should know or look out for as I'm watching it for the first time? Let me know in the comments. Cheers. I spend an average of 30 to 40 hours per week on TikTok. Describing this to some people would convince them that it's the same as spending 30 to 40 hours watching TV. I can point to the art that I've made, and you might be able to imagine that this took some amount of time, at least long enough for the paint to dry. And I can also point to this pile of notes. This is a list of core programming paradigms, and I've talked about these before. I've made around 5,000 posts on TikTok. Kinda for free. But also, if an employer knows that this is how I would spend 30 to 40 hours, and my resume is already online, and AI can copy the text on my resume, there are going to be dozens of people who are training systems without prospects of getting hired, because the old way of structuring employment has died. Most people aren't aware of this. Some people with funding can be traditionalists and employ people through the traditional ways. But if remaining employed requires rapport, I'd rather start with what I do. Communicating with different audiences requires different attention. I mostly focus on education. My major in college was learning and education studies with a concentration in applied learning science. Leadership is a quality. Cheers. I think it's worth noting that I don't get paid from the platforms. Maybe I might get $1. That depends on who gifts me during TikTok lives. Usually I exchange that for gifts that I can give other people. The only way I get income is when people donate or hire me, which doesn't tend to happen. It doesn't tend to happen because I focus on teaching people how to code. The reason I do that is so our industries don't collapse. If no one knows how to maintain these very complex systems, and we can see that experienced engineers are being fired from very crucial systems, there is going to be a lot of pain down the line if there isn't someone who's educating people for the sake of making sure they understand. There are for-profit boot camps. Those often don't prepare people to be successful in the roles that they're hired into. At an industrial scale, this means that companies are skeptical of boot camp graduates, without necessarily contextualizing who was their teacher. You can network your way into positions, and I have been the link that has gotten people into some positions. It isn't a transactional thing. If you send me money, I'll be grateful, and it'll be easier for me to not need to pay my bills by marketing. Then I can do actual interesting stuff that is easier for more people to relate to and connect to their own experiences. But if you've been paying attention at all to our country and the direction that things are going, you might be more incentivized to join and help towards increased literacy. You can do that by joining author groups as an author and writing books that you care about and talking about them. Some people are just a little bit of motivation away from engaging with a medium that can help them share language very meaningfully with their community. If government funding is going to be drying up, we really do need to be able to share the kinds of conversations and understanding that can help us navigate this mess. Thank you for being here, and thank you for donating. The links are in my bio. Cheers. Most parents haven't studied cognitive development over the course of generations. Many schools are incentivized to listen to the demands of parents who don't have this context. Teachers that are upset by this often do speak out, and sometimes they're fired. This demotivates their peers, and the problem gets worse. This problem has been mentioned since the 70s. That's 50 years ago. Now, we as a culture need to do a bit more to encourage developmentally mindful patterns. I do this by supporting indie authors. I think that it's really cool that there can be people who are motivated to express their creative ideas and share time with each other. The process of publication is meaningful. You can self-publish, and it's really cool when people read your book, leave reviews, and describe how it made them feel. This is a cultural thing that costs me money. If you've spent money on takeout or entertainment, I'm asking for you to contribute funds. You can also contribute the amount of time that I've spent on TikTok. I can only really expect people to do the amount of work that, I can only do all of the work that I've been doing and hope that someone picks up on what I've been doing and matches my pace. Most people aren't, which is why we're here. Send money if you can. Thank you. Cheers. There's a person on Twitter who developed an application that can help you cheat on technical interviews. There are also now systems that can replicate voices. This means that many tech companies are going to return to in-office interviews or paid assessments over the course of weeks or months. Tech founders who understand scale will be able to make use of this, and it might be the case that this is what dissolves software engineering as a defined career. The companies that understand what software engineers have been doing might still hire them. But now with AI, it makes a lot more sense to hire someone with business knowledge who knows some code, than just leave all of the complexity to companies that specialize in that. The companies that specialize in navigating complexity are going to be the existent big tech companies or boutique dev shops. You can start your own. You need to make content on YouTube anyway if you want to consistently represent the thing that you do. We used to use resumes that were paper, and then we switched to PDFs, and now we require video. Is this good? I don't know. We're here. If you make and laminate art, you can talk through it as you describe something else. And you might be able to mention the stuff that you've laminated and the reasons that you've spent time on the stuff that you've been talking about. And the point of this psychologically is to just anchor that you are an entity, you are a specific point of identity that is trying to do stuff, that has goals. And the point of this is we don't necessarily know how common AI agents are going to be. We do know the kinds of stuff that we might want to organize around or do with other people. So if you can describe a thing that you would do with other people and also point to a history of your career, then people might hire you for your career if they're curious about the rest of your ecosystem, if there's a story that they can engage with that is interesting to them. Something that's often frustrating for people who, how do I say this? People who have a lot of money want to feel like it's good that they have a lot of money, and sometimes they're willing to give some people some of their money, and sometimes they do this by starting companies. But when they're there, they're still going to want to feel like they have a purpose, like the stuff that they're doing isn't just charity, which interestingly feels bad for a lot of people. So you actually do need to have credentials, but you also need to have a story that describes your plot. And my plot is that this is an art pile that I've made, and I update it pretty often. This is my style.